We're going to use the CIN object to read in data from a user. So let's look at this program. I've created 3 different primitive type variables, a char variable called letter, an int variable called num, and a double variable called cost. And then I'm going to run the CIN object. And what that object does is it listens for the input stream. So when you prompt your user to enter in some information, CIN will read everything that the user has typed up to the enter key. So when the user hits enter, all those characters are sent to CIN, and then CIN will take those characters one by one and put them into the variables that you specify. So what I'm telling CIN to do is to put the first char in letter, and then put an integer in num, and put a floating or decimal type variable in cost. And then I'm going to print those variables out. So let's go ahead and run that. So the first thing CIN is waiting for is a character. So I'm going to just type in the character S, and then it's waiting for an integer. This is next. So I will type in an integer 10, and then I'm going to type in a decimal 3.24, and it prints out those values. So this right here is the input stream that CIN is working with. It's expecting to find, when the user hits enter, a char, an int, and a cost. And CIN will ignore any blank characters. So let's run that again. And this time I'm going to put my input in a different order. So I'm going to put in an integer, and then I'm going to put in the decimal number, and then a character. So this is the input that I'm going to be sending to CIN. And look what happens. What CIN is expecting is one character, an integer, and then a double, right? So when it's sent the input stream, it reads in one character. So it's going to read the number 1 as a character. And then it will go to the next character, and it's going to read that as an integer. So it knows to keep reading while it's finding numbers, and then as soon as it gets to a space or a non-digit, it knows that it's the end of that integer. So it's going to read in the 2 as the integer, and then it's going to ignore white space, and then it'll read in all of the digits and then the decimal point as a float. So when you type in a decimal surrounded by digits, it looks like a decimal value. So CIN knows that, and it will keep reading the characters until it gets to a non-digit. So when it got to this space, it stopped reading, and then it put the 5.45 into cost. Now, because we still had other characters in our input stream, CIN goes into what's called a fail state. So if we were to read in more information later on in our program, CIN would be confused. So we're going to learn how to deal with that later, but that's how you read data from the user into primitive type variables.